When you wake up every morning, you have a choice: merely exist or make something that endures long after you're gone. The world may seem normal, but beneath that surface lies an ocean of untapped opportunities waiting for someone bold enough to act. Leaving a legacy isn't about ego or fame. It's about fundamentally improving the trajectory of humanity by solving the problems that others ignore or deem impossible. Improvement does not happen by accident. It is engineered through relentless effort, disciplined experimentation, and a refusal to accept mediocrity as the default. Innovation is not the privilege of a select few. It's a responsibility. Each of us has access to more tools and more knowledge than entire generations before. And that means there's no excuse not to leverage them to build something meaningful. Think about it. The systems that define our future, energy, transportation, communication, exploration, are wide open for disruption. Someone will transform them. The only question is whether you'll be part of that transformation or someone who watches from the sidelines. Legacy comes from having a long-term vision and aligning every single step to it, even when the short-term results aren't in your favor. There will be failure, there will be frustration. You'll go through moments when logic says to turn back. Those are exactly the moments that test whether your vision is genuine or just a convenient phrase. The ones who truly leave a legacy are those who carry on through those moments, not because it's easy, but because their belief in the mission outweighs the temporary setbacks. Measure your impact not by how many people agree with you in the moment, but by how many lives are ultimately improved because you stayed the course. Ideas that change the world often sound unreasonable when first proposed. People will critique your ambition, tell you it's naive, force you to compromise. Ignore that noise. Instead, keep your focus on the outcome you want to create and build a team of people who share that vision. When a group of highly focused individuals works toward a single mission with no fear of failure, the limits start to fall away. There's no rule that says progress must be incremental. You can aim for 10x improvement instead of 10%. You can challenge assumptions that everyone else treats as law. You can take projects from concept to reality faster than anyone expects. But to do that, you have to make decisions based on physics first principles, not tradition or precedent. Don't ask what others have done, ask what is truly possible. Then build backward from that. Ask yourself, if someone looked back on your work 100 years from now, would they say the world is better because of it? Would they trace a line from your actions to a brighter, more sustainable, more exciting future? That's the standard that should guide your decisions, not comfort, not security, legacy. And it doesn't require a perfect plan from day one. You can start with a small step, a prototype, a small launch, a new line of code. What matters is momentum. Keep iterating, keep refining, treat every setback as data, be ruthlessly honest about what works and what doesn't. The people who leave a legacy don't wait for perfect conditions, they create them. Ultimately, leaving a legacy means dedicating your life to building things that expand the boundaries of what's possible for others. Whether it's a technology that empowers millions, a system that accelerates human learning, or a breakthrough that opens an entirely new frontier, it starts with the decision to pursue a mission bigger than yourself. So don't hold back, dream boldly, execute relentlessly, and build something that future generations will look at and say, that's the moment everything changed. To pursue a long-term mission that improves humanity, you first have to look beyond the distractions that dominate most people's daily routines and train your mind to focus obsessively on a single objective that actually matters, one that has the potential to elevate the quality of life for millions of people, even if that means walking away from comfortable patterns and predictable outcomes, because true progress is rarely born in the safe zones that society constructs for the sake of convenience and temporary satisfaction, and once you establish that mission, you need to engineer a path by breaking down the end state into fundamental components, using first principle thinking to identify which assumptions need to be challenged and which technologies need to be created from scratch rather than borrowed from pre-existing models simply because they happen to be readily available, since relying on legacy frameworks often leads to incremental improvement instead of transformative change. And as you build toward that vision, you must constantly resist the seductive pull of mediocrity, which infiltrates teams, systems, and even individual mindsets disguised as compromise, reasonableness, or practicality, each of which can slowly degrade the integrity of the original mission if allowed to creep into the decision-making process without rigorous questioning and experimentation. And part of refusing mediocrity means being willing to make unpopular choices that may upset stakeholders, investors, or even the broader public in the short term, especially when those choices are rooted in data and logic rather than emotion or tradition. For example, continuing to invest heavily in research and development even when external observers question the immediate return, because you understand that disruptive solutions require long periods of prototyping, testing, and iteration before they reach the breakthrough phase, and that the long-term payoff will dwarf any short-term discomfort or skepticism. And simultaneously you need to build an organizational culture that reinforces the mission at every level. A culture in which every engineer, designer, strategist, and support member understands that the goal is not to meet the minimum requirements, deliver a slightly better version of an existing solution, but to fundamentally redefine the way a problem is approached and solved. And this requires a disciplined approach to communication, where ideas are debated openly and rigorously, where people are encouraged to question assumptions, regardless of hierarchy, and where failure is treated not as an endpoint but as a vital source of information that can inform the next iteration. And in that sense, failure becomes a key ingredient for long-term success, because it exposes flaws in the current model and forces the team to rethink and redesign with greater precision. And refusing mediocrity also demands an almost obsessive level of commitment from the individual pursuing the mission, a willingness to work long hours, to dive deeply into complex technical issues, and to maintain an unwavering belief in the long-term vision, even when external metrics like profit, public opinion, or market trends temporarily appear to suggest that the mission is unrealistic or misguided. And when others begin to doubt or lose interest, that is exactly the moment when your conviction must intensify, because bringing a long-term mission to life is not a linear process. It is full of nonlinear jumps, sudden breakthroughs, and periods of apparent stagnation that can easily be misinterpreted as failure unless you remain focused on the overall trajectory. And throughout this process, it becomes essential to continuously recalibrate the mission to ensure it remains aligned with the core objective of improving humanity, which may involve expanding the scope to include new discoveries, partnerships, or adjacent technologies that can accelerate progress, or shedding old strategies that no longer serve the goal. And the individual must remain agile enough to adapt quickly without losing sight of the foundational principles that motivated the mission in the first place. And this delicate balance between flexibility and unwavering commitment is what separates those who build a legacy from those who simply chase trends, because legacy builders never compromise the mission for the sake of convenience. They are willing to endure hardship, public criticism, and repeated iteration in order to achieve outcomes that future generations will look back on as pivotal turning points in the evolution of human capability. And that is why pursuing a long-term mission requires both intellectual rigor and emotional resilience, an understanding that the road will be unpredictable and difficult, but also a belief that every step taken today lays the groundwork for a radically improved future. And even on the days when progress seemed invisible, when the prototypes fail, the simulations fall apart, or the team falls behind schedule, The mission must continue with absolute determination, because those seemingly insignificant struggles accumulate into the breakthroughs that change the world, and it is the refusal to accept a good enough solution that drives the creation of new possibilities, which in turn inspires others to dream bigger, to question established norms, and to push the boundaries of technology, science, and human capability, so that the next generation will challenging conventional assumptions begins with identifying the invisible constraints that most people never question, and developing the discipline to analyze every idea from its most basic components rather than trusting inherited knowledge. Because a great number of systems that appear immutable are often based on habits, routines, or historical limitations that no longer apply, and the moment you train your mind to break a problem down into its fundamental truths, you gain the ability to reassemble those truths in completely new ways and derive possibilities that seem impossible to everyone else. And this way of thinking requires intense curiosity and an unwillingness to accept that the current way of doing things is optimal simply because it has been repeated for decades. Meanwhile, others continue to operate inside the boundaries of accepted norms, modifying only what is obvious on the surface, which leads to incremental progress at best. But those who rely on first principles examine every element of a problem to determine whether it is physically necessary, mathematically efficient, or merely the product of tradition. And when you evaluate problems in that way, you start noticing that a large percentage of constraints are self-imposed, the result of outdated standards that no longer serve a real purpose. And once you remove those artificial constraints, you create room for radically new strategies that cut costs, accelerate production, enable new functionalities, or open pathways into unexplored territories. And yet this kind of thinking is not welcomed at first because it disrupts entrenched systems and makes many people uncomfortable. So you must be mentally prepared to face resistance from those who prefer familiarity over innovation. But as long as your reasoning is grounded in logic and validated by experimentation, you will discover that the seemingly illogical route is often the correct one, and every time you successfully challenge a convention, you build more confidence in your ability to tackle larger and more complex problems, which gradually expands the scope of your vision and amplifies your impact. Meanwhile, it is crucial to combine this mindset with a practical framework that allows you to test hypotheses quickly and refine them through real-world feedback. Because first principles thinking by itself is not enough without the ability to translate the insights into tangible prototypes and iterate based on data. So the process becomes a continuous loop in which you question assumptions, extract the core variables, design a new approach, test the results, gather data, and repeat. And the more cycles you complete, the more your understanding deepens, and what once seemed like a radical idea becomes the new baseline for further exploration. And over time, this habit of questioning becomes so deeply ingrained that you start applying it to every aspect of your work and even your life, which enhances your ability to make decisions with clarity and precision, because you're no longer influenced by the pressure to conform or the fear of being wrong. Instead, you are driven by an internal commitment to discover what is actually possible. And when you surround yourself with people who adopt the same approach, you create a culture where nothing is taken for granted and every problem is viewed as an opportunity to redesign from the ground up. And this environment becomes a breeding ground for innovation on a scale that most people believe can only be achieved by large institutions or governments. But in reality, a small group of individuals using first principles thinking can generate solutions that redefine entire industries. And one powerful example is the difference between asking, how do we make this technology cheaper, versus what are the fundamental properties we need to achieve this result, and how can we rearrange them in a more efficient form, which often leads to unexpected discoveries, such as replacing expensive materials with lighter composites or developing completely new manufacturing processes that avoid the bottlenecks of traditional assembly lines. And once you adopt this mindset, you no longer feel restricted by conventional timelines or cost structures. Instead, you view every challenge as a puzzle that can be solved by breaking it into smaller parts, analyzing the physics behind those parts, and reassembling them in a more elegant and scalable way. And through this approach, you start to recognize that many of the existing solutions are not the result of deep reasoning but of compromise. And the moment you stop compromising, you open the door to innovations that redefine the standards by which everything else is measured. And it is precisely this refusal to rely on precedent that allows you to envision solutions that have never been attempted, like advancing entire fields of transportation, energy, or space exploration by treating them as interconnected systems rather than isolated projects. And by spending the time to understand the mechanics of each component at a granular level, you discover opportunities for synergy and integration that dramatically increase efficiency while reducing complexity. And although this requires an enormous amount of effort and mental stamina, it ultimately produces breakthroughs with long-term effects that surpass even the most ambitious expectations. And as you continue to think this way, you become more sensitive to the small but critical details that others overlook, such as a specific chemical property that could optimize fuel efficiency or a software architecture that enables rapid adaptability. And it is in those details that the most transformative ideas emerge, because they allow you to leapfrog years of conventional development cycles and compress the timeline for change. And by applying the same method repeatedly, every project evolves into a proof of concept for the next project, creating a compounding effect where the knowledge you gain from challenging one assumption feeds directly into your ability to dismantle the next one. And eventually the distinction between what is realistic and what is unrealistic begins to fade, replaced by the simple question of whether the proposed outcome is physically possible according to the laws of nature. And if the answer is yes, then it becomes merely a matter of engineering, iteration, and perseverance. And at this point, the only remaining barrier is the willingness to dedicate the necessary time, resources, and intellectual effort to make it real. And it is that willingness, more than anything else, that sets apart those who transform industries from those who merely observe developments and wait for someone else to take the lead. Which is why the mindset of challenging conventional assumptions and building from first principles must be cultivated deliberately and practiced consistently, even when there is no immediate incentive, because the long-term consequences of thinking this way extend far beyond any single project or company, shaping the trajectory of innovation for generations, embracing failure as data and iterating relentlessly toward breakthrough. Innovation means redefining the entire relationship you have with mistakes and setbacks, treating them not as evidence of inadequacy, but as a crucial source of information that guides your next move. And it begins with the recognition that the path to transformative progress is rarely linear, because real innovation happens through countless cycles of trial and error, where each attempt reveals something new about the problem, the system, or the approach. And those revelations, when analyzed carefully, become the building blocks for the next phase of development. And this requires a mindset shift from perfectionism to experimentation, where the goal is not to be right the first time, but to learn as much as possible from every test. And that means intentionally designing processes that expose weaknesses, inconsistencies, and edge cases early, so that those insights can be fed back into the design. And as you do this repeatedly, your understanding deepens and your solutions become more precise, more efficient, and more scalable. And it is essential to remove the emotional stigma around failure, because the moment you start fearing it, you begin avoiding ambitious ideas and gravitating towards safe but mediocre solutions. So instead, you must cultivate an environment where people feel empowered to run experiments and push the limits, knowing that even if a particular attempt fails, the results will be analyzed, documented, and used to inform a more refined version of the idea. And when a team truly operates this way, the pace of innovation accelerates dramatically because it reduces the delay between learning and applying. And in this context, iteration becomes the engine that drives improvement, transforming what started as a rough prototype into a polished breakthrough. And what makes this approach so powerful is that each failure contains data that you couldn't have predicted in advance, insights into real-world behavior that no theoretical model could fully capture, and by embracing these lessons, you begin to see patterns and possibilities that were previously invisible, and over time, the fear of uncertainty is replaced by excitement because every failed experiment is another step closer to a deeply informed solution. Meanwhile, it is critical to embed this mindset across all levels of the organization so that every engineer, designer, researcher, or strategist understands that their role is to extract as much information as possible from each iteration and immediately feed it back into the work, removing unnecessary delays or bureaucratic filters that often dilute the raw insight. And in doing so, you create a feedback loop that compounds over time, where every iteration is more refined than the last, and the cumulative effect becomes exponential learning. And it is in this environment that breakthrough innovation becomes almost inevitable, because the more you fail intelligently and iterate rapidly, more your solutions converge towards something both groundbreaking and reliable. And this approach also requires the courage to discard ideas that no longer serve the mission, even if significant time and resources have already been invested, because clinging to outdated models simply to justify past efforts prevents you from discovering better pathways. So instead of resisting change, you accept that every iteration, even a seemingly unsuccessful one, contributes to your understanding of the problem and therefore has already delivered value. And this mindset liberates you to make bold adjustments that might initially seem counterintuitive, but are supported by real data from past iterations. And in many cases, the willingness to pivot based on feedback is what separates a stagnant project from a revolutionary breakthrough. And the process is not limited to product design or engineering, but can be applied to strategy, operations, and organizational culture, because every system has room for improvement and can benefit from iterative refinement. And once failure becomes framed as part of a learning process, you start to see challenges as opportunities rather than obstacles, and this in turn fuels persistence, which is another critical component of breakthrough innovation, because the truth is that many people give up too early, abandoning their mission after a few failures or setbacks. But those who truly change the world keep going, not because they enjoy failure, but because they understand that within those failures lies the precise information needed to succeed, and by continuing to test, refine, and iterate, they gradually uncover the optimal solution that others were too impatient to find. And this requires a high tolerance for ambiguity and a strong sense of purpose, because at times the path may appear uncertain and the results may not yet match the scale of the vision. But if the mission is clear and you trust the iterative process, then each failure becomes a source of motivation rather than discouragement, and you begin to view the journey itself as a series of valuable experiments, and eventually the data you collect informs a breakthrough that not only solves the original problem, but also sets a new benchmark for what is possible in the field, inspiring others to adopt the same mindset of experimentation and relentless iteration. And as more people begin to embrace failure as data and treat every setback as a source of insight, the collective scope of innovation expands, and progress accelerates at a societal level, because more individuals and teams are willing to take risks, run bold experiments, and refine their ideas without being paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes. And ultimately, this approach transforms the culture of innovation itself, making it less about perfection and more about learning, adapting, and evolving. And over time, the systems and products created through this method become more robust, more scalable, and more aligned with real-world needs, because they are the result of countless cycles of feedback and improvement, and this relentless pursuit of refinement becomes a defining characteristic of those who drive breakthrough innovation, allowing them to achieve results that would have seemed impossible at the outset of the journey. Surrounding yourself with focused people who share the vision and execute boldly begins with a careful selection process that goes far beyond conventional hiring criteria and concentrates instead on identifying individuals whose intrinsic motivations align with the long-term mission, individuals who are not merely attracted to the prestige of being part of a groundbreaking project, but who genuinely believe in the purpose and are willing to invest their time, energy, and creativity without expecting immediate validation or external rewards. And this requires a leadership mindset that prioritizes values and mindset over polished credentials, because what ultimately drives progress is not a perfect resume, but a deep commitment to solving difficult problems under uncertain conditions. And once those individuals come together, the environment must be carefully engineered to maintain focus and momentum, eliminating distractions, inefficiencies, and bureaucratic processes that dilute energy and fragment attention. Because even a small degree of complacency or misalignment can slow down progress and contaminate the culture of execution, so it becomes essential to communicate the mission with absolute clarity and reinforce it through every action, decision, and conversation, ensuring that everyone remains anchored to the core objective at all times. And as this shared focus takes root, it begins to create a powerful feedback loop in which each team member's determination fuels the determination of others, leading to a collective level of intensity that would not be possible if everyone were working in isolation or chasing separate agendas. And in this environment, bold execution is not an occasional burst of effort but a default operating mode, because the team understands that hesitation or incremental thinking would jeopardize the mission's success, and that awareness drives a sense of urgency that translates into rapid prototyping, aggressive timelines, and a willingness to confront challenges head-on, even when the outcome is uncertain or the risks are high. And to sustain this level of execution, the team must be empowered with the freedom to make decisions and act on them without being slowed down by unnecessary approvals or hierarchical structures, which means leaders must trust their teams enough to let them solve problems autonomously while providing the strategic direction and resources needed to overcome obstacles quickly. And this trust becomes the foundation of a high-performance culture where everyone feels accountable for the mission's success and therefore takes ownership of their work at a profound level. And in moments of intense pressure or unexpected failure, this collective ownership becomes especially important, because instead of pointing fingers or waiting for someone else to fix the issue, team members proactively collaborate to diagnose the problem, learn from it, and implement a better solution. And as these experiences compound, the team develops an unprecedented level of resilience and adaptability, which in turn reinforces their confidence in bold decision-making, allowing them to move even faster and tackle even more ambitious challenges. And over time, this combination of shared vision, disciplined focus, and bold execution creates a distinct culture that attracts other like-minded individuals who want to contribute, thereby making it easier to scale the team without diluting its core values. And when new team members arrive, they immediately sense the expectation for excellence and the intolerance for mediocrity, which pushes them to raise their standards and fully engage in the mission. And this self-reinforcing dynamic ensures that the team remains aligned and driven even as the scale of the project grows and the complexity increases. And as this alignment and drive continue to intensify, they begin to outweigh external constraints such as limited resources or public skepticism, because the team's internal motivation is far stronger than any external pressure, and that allows them to keep moving forward even when conventional logic might suggest it's time to slow down or compromise. And to maintain this level of performance, it is also critical to foster open communication and intellectual honesty, so that ideas are evaluated based on merit rather than status or hierarchy. And when everyone is encouraged to speak openly and challenge assumptions, it prevents complacency and ensures that the best ideas rise to the top. And this culture of transparency also makes it easier to identify and correct mistakes quickly, because no one is afraid to admit when something isn't working, and this accelerates the learning process and strengthens the entire team, and ultimately this approach transforms the group into a cohesive unit operating with a single purpose, constantly pushing the boundaries of what is possible and executing with a sense of urgency that others may perceive as unreasonable, but which is absolutely necessary to achieve breakthroughs at scale. And as the mission advances and new milestones are achieved, the team experiences a sense of collective pride and ownership that further amplifies their commitment and drives them to pursue even more challenging goals, because they have internalized not only the mission but also the belief that bold execution is the only path to meaningful progress. And this belief becomes ingrained in every decision they make, from the way they structure their workflows to the way they respond to difficulties, creating a momentum that cannot be easily disrupted or replicated by competitors who lack the same level of alignment and dedication. And this is why building a team of focused individuals who share the vision is not a one-time task, but an ongoing effort that requires constant reinforcement, clear communication, and decisive leadership. And as long as the mission remains clear, the team remains committed, and the culture remains uncompromising, the organization will continue to move forward with extraordinary speed and precision, delivering solutions that redefine industries and inspire future generations to adopt the same relentless pursuit of progress. And that is how surrounding yourself with the right people and fostering a bold execution culture ultimately produces a legacy that transcends individual contributions and creates lasting impact.